April 12th.
It is.
It is April 12th. So April 12th, 1 million cups, welcome. Today, we have a presenter, Jacob, who's going to tell us a little bit about some housing projects he's working on. And then I want to spend a couple minutes at the end and update you on what's going on with the military innovation ecosystem work that we're doing at this point. And remind everyone that the website, if you want to apply to present, is found if you go to 1MCups.com/Anchorage. That's one as in the number one. You'll find information there about the upcoming presentations, as well as each week a link for streaming. And you'll also find there under the present button an opportunity to apply to present and you select a community, and that would be Anchorage. 1 Million Cups is a program that's been running in Anchorage for about 10 years. It's a place for entrepreneurs and people working on innovative new projects to come and share what they're working on and to have a discussion with the community about that work and look for support and connections that would help accelerate that work. This session and others like it get recorded and will be put on the 1 Million Cups Anchorage Facebook page. And I would encourage you to continue staying connected to that page if you have questions or want to follow up presenters that are here each week. So with that, and without a great degree of applause, Jacob, let me get your presentation up and we'll go from there.
Do you want me to push into the next slide or
a
few different?
I think slideshow. Let me do a screen share. There you go. And okay, cool. You're up there in a box in the corner. Actually, I'm going to move you down to the bottom there. So go ahead. And as far as this, I don't have a clicker, so you can either beat on the computer or let me know, and I'll advance the slide either way.
Perfect. Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. So my name is Jacob Brubaker. I am the co-founder of Employee Housing Solutions. So I came up to Alaska in 2010. I started working for the McKinley Princess Lodge. From 2010 to now, I've held multiple jobs within the hospitality industry, but I've also gained a love for commercial real estate. So a few years ago, I learned about housing shortages within resort communities in towns where the tourism rate is high. So I kind of put two and two together, and that's where I came up with Employee Housing Solutions, where we repurpose commercial or
That would be me. That might be me.
So the problem that's facing the communities across the country where the tourism rate is high is, one, Airbnbs have taken over the last few years, especially since COVID, which is allowing prices for homes to go up. So what that does is, so there's the issue of high employee turnover, employers unable to fill positions, and employees struggling to find affordable housing. So what we're seeing is that employees are having to live 6, 7, 8 per house, and the conditions are not good. So the evidence across the country. So my first initial contact was with Vail Resorts. I had a conversation with their director of employee housing. And she had given me a list of 10 different locations across the country where they were interested in housing. And at the time, they said, you give us the housing and we'll sign a 10-year contract on whatever it is. Jackson Hole is having issues. There's articles about employees living in tents, living in their cars, out in the woods. And then they show up the next day to a 3, 4, 5-star resort and are expected to give a, act like they're ready to go, and they didn't just sleep in a tent the night. Montana, we're working with a few different companies right now to get an idea of what their need is and start purchasing and start investing in real estate in those communities. Another place is Utah. down in southern Utah. You've got the areas where there's national parks. The Airbnb market's taken over. People have moved there, causing the prices to go up. One of the biggest issues is you may be able to find housing for your employees, but it's not the scale of what you need. You can find housing that may fit 2 or 3 of your employees, but in order to have, people that are going to last through their contracts, in order to find housing for families, you need something more scale-wise to fit. What I love about Alaska and the opportunity right now, so I've talked with a few employers from Fairbanks, Anchorage, Seward, and the Southeast. For me, Seward is probably one of the biggest opportunities I see. The reason for that is, so the Alaska Railroad, along with a few different cruise lines, are extending the dock down in Seward. So the max capacity right now on cruise ships is 2,500 guests. By 2025, it's going to go to 4,500 plus, which is going to, one, bring in more tourism, but also the demand is higher, meaning you need more employees to provide the service that they expect. So I think there's a lot of opportunities down in Seward, and especially around Girdwood area as well. So that's perfect. Right there. So the opportunity that we see is to repurpose commercial real estate for employee housing. So when we say repurpose, we're talking about motels, hotels, and apartment buildings. We're talking about putting kitchenettes into each unit. I think part of it is we want to give the employer a place to put their employees, but we want the employees to have a safe, affordable, clean place to live. We're not trying to fit 10 employees in every unit like some people are. So by doing this, we see an increase in our monthly revenue 2 to 4x from what the previous owner was doing. Now, by signing multi-year lease agreements with resorts and business partners, and then we have minimal on-site management costs because we're allowing the previous or the employer that we're working with to come in and manage those things. We have offered multiple different packages as far as they can come in and run it themselves, or we can have management put in place for them, and we can be there to assist their employees before they move to. So our model again, so we purchase multi-purpose real estate for employee housing. We're adding 2 to 4 beds per room, so we're putting bunk beds in, and then we're charging rent per bed instead of per unit. So what we do is we work again directly with the company, and so they would pay us rent, and then just like the lodge that I work at, they take it directly out of the employee's paycheck, so they're offsetting those amounts. We're signing 2 to 5 year master leases with hospitality companies, and then we want to maximize all opportunities for future growth. So the name of the company is Employee Housing Solutions. So we want to be able to provide a safe, clean, affordable place to live. But we also want to provide shuttles to work if that's what the employee needs. We want to provide, breakfast before employees go. Different packages, different solutions, but our core right now is just taking care of the employees in a place to live. With that, so my partner, my brother Ben, we both have lots of experience. I have experience within the hospitality industry. He's got experience working with, he was the chief of staff at Assure, where they handle SPV and PE fund administration. So he's kind of leading the way on that front, and I'm trying to get the word out right now, not only to local business owners, but people that are able to, that need the housing and we can help. So that's kind of my spiel. So I think the biggest thing right now is, we're new, we're young, we're hungry to find and talk with business owners and make it work.
Yeah, software. Oh, a big round of applause.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Wow, so, and I can grab a chair if you want.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a small
Yeah.
group.
No, we can do that.
Yeah, there you go. So, I was curious from what you said, it sounds like maybe you're pretty close, or maybe you already have some projects where you've got some lease agreements at this point, or are you still?
So we have our first one that's hopefully going to be happening in Columbia Falls / Whitefish, Montana.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we're working with a big hospitality company there that need it. We're trying. We've got a few companies that are interested, but they want the one project to prove the concept.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
So the big question on my mind that I'm curious about, I mean, it's such a huge need for what you're doing. So that just goes without saying. I've run into this every single community, you know, that's involved in tourism is there. But I don't quite understand one piece of it, which is it seems like you're taking some of the housing out of play that's needed for the tourists that are coming. When you talk about using commercial motels, hotels and stuff like that, and yet those are the ones. So what's the play in terms of how you finding the right kind of property that you actually can bring into this market that's not already needed to address what Lake and Seward already has a short supply of hotel rooms already. So if you're taking that out of play, I don't quite get that.
Agreed. So I think one has to happen for the other two. So we have to have the employees, we have to have the workforce there to be able to work in the hotels and the restaurants and the small businesses. So it's not an easy concept when it comes to taking away from the supply of the people that are coming.
Mhm.
But if you don't have the supply of housing to be able to take care of those guests, then the service suffers. Places.
Yeah, no, I get it's a chicken and the egg
Yeah,
problem.
it is.
But it seems like you're killing the chicken to lay the egg.
Agreed.
In terms of trying to find property. I know in the case of Seward, and I'm curious how you view this, is Seward, you know, it's one of the large tour companies, does boats, and name doesn't matter, I guess. But they're basically having to build their own houses, you know, over on the other side of Nash Road in that area, because there's nothing for them to buy to convert to do anything with. So
And so there's in Seward, you're right. There's not a lot of places that are already pre-built, ready to go for housing. Some of those are going to have to be developments that you do, and that's something else that we're willing to do and work with companies. The biggest thing right now is in order to make those things happen, you need LOIs from companies. So once we get those, that's where we're going in and really finding out what we're able to do.
What are you noticing that the housing problem is in the bigger cities or in rural areas?
It's more in the resort communities. So when you get into, like, if we're talking about Colorado, there's some areas that they say, well, we need the housing, we need the workforce housing, but it's a different type of housing than what we're currently. When we get into these communities, we hear from city workers, from first responders to teachers, saying we need the same thing, and we would love to work with them as well and be able to have those contracts. The housing is going to be a little bit different because you're going from maybe a seasonal employee to a resident who may have a family that needs a little bit bigger place. So I think we see a employee housing route and a workforce housing. The workforce is the people that are going to be staying in the community that need the housing, and then everybody else kind of seasonal work that may be coming in and out. And I think by providing the smaller housing for single employees that are maybe not there right now, we're freeing up the bigger units and the family units that they're currently.
instead of taking a larger unit out to have 6 or 8 people all share it.
Yeah.
You're potentially moving those folks into stuff that's more appropriately sized using funds and then freeing up the larger unit to be used in more traditional techniques.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
So I think there's a lot of, obviously a lot of good that can come out of this. You know, there is, we do see hesitance from people as we come in and talk about this because of what you brought up, taking inventory out from your tourism. So showing that first, second, third property and doing it the right way and showing that we're doing good.
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering also, have you looked at how to maybe use non-traditional property for this very specific segment of folks? Because I would imagine the folks, you know, the single-ish folks that are coming up that would otherwise be staying in a tent out in the woods, like you see happening in Seward. Because again, there's nowhere else to stay. They just go out on the road out to the glacier and find a place to stay. I'm just wondering about, you know, I know in Seward, there's been some old warehouses, for example, that are being used. And I'm wondering if there's a non-traditional kind of housing, and I can imagine all sorts of code problems in the way to get away, but is there a way to use housing that doesn't compete with tourists to be able to provide?
I think there is. I think there absolutely is. There was a town in Colorado I went to, and the property we were looking at was actually used to be a boys' home. We wanted to convert, but the zoning for that facility would have taken about a year and a half to change in order to get to where we need to be. The city knew it was an issue, the county knows it's an issue, they want to help, but there's that time you got to wait. And so I think a lot of it comes down to that.
So you need to find something that's already zoned for residential housing use already configured that way.
And I think we're, again, our push is to find a way to make to take this situation out from the companies. So we can find the warehouses that are zoned, and we can go in and renovate and do something to make it comfortable. We would absolutely.
How do you think about the seasonal nature of the workers in terms of making the cash flow? It seems like bringing in and having a place fully occupied for 4 months, maybe 5 months a year.
So what I saw, so my first phone call I ever had about this was with the director of employee housing. And what she said was they needed as many rooms as I could provide, whether they had employees in those rooms year round or not. They would sign a lease for those rooms. The biggest issue is, you know, we've got to hire for us at the McKinley Princess Lodge. We hire about 350 employees, and so in order to have the housing every year to be able to guarantee that you're going to have the staff, you've got to have the housing. And you know, it is sticky, and we thought about, you know, having the companies allow us to, you know, rent them out as a week rent minimum wagers, or, you know, do something else to take the burden away from them during that time.
Yeah, because that was one of the things I was thinking about. So if you get these housing, you're building something for these employees for their season. So then, you know, season could be 6 months, it could be 4 months, depending on where you're at. So then what happens to the housing the rest of the year? They have to somehow keep the maintenance upon them to be able to come back next season.
Exactly. And you know, the one thing that we see, so in Truckee, with the resort there, they have 2 buildings for employee housing. Each one of them right now are about a year and so, you know, we see that the demand is there. Now, it may not be as busy during the summer or as busy during the winter, but the demand is there. There's people there wanting the housing, so we think we can capitalize off of that.
Hey, Susan, David and I are hogging the floor here. Do you have any questions from what you've been able to hear?
Not at this time. It sounds like a good idea, and I really appreciate all of the other input there, because I think you're right about, you know, maybe repurposing other structures for that would be a really good idea.
Yeah.
And we have seen places like South Lake Tahoe and Jackson Hole, Wyoming. There are current mom and pop owned motels, hotels that are allowing X amount of rooms for employees in the community.
Yeah.
So I think there are places that are kind of doing what we're talking about, but what we're wanting to do is kind of make it a brand for housing across the country.
Yeah. Fascinating. So, but skipping away from kind of, I'm just always intrigued because housing, in my opinion, is probably the number one issue in Alaska right now. This is a sleeper issue, maybe number two to where the salmon, but housing is affecting, basically everybody that lives here in Anchorage. I just met with an entrepreneur last week who's having to move out to the valley because they can't find affordable housing, single person. Here in town, I know from Seward and Juneau and other communities that housing is the issue. The folks up in Nome that are looking at the new port project up there, they've got to bring in 1,000 or 1,500 workers. They've got a housing problem up there. Housing across Alaska and the cost of housing is absolutely killer issue. So, the need for it and all the different flavors is really clear, and you're going after one. Kind of going at it from a different angle though, kind of what's your interest in being an entrepreneur and starting a business like this? I mean, this is hard, takes a while. How did you get started on this path personally and wanting to take on this problem?
It started with the desire to have just cash flow. I wanted to buy single family homes and just have that cash flow coming in. And then I started looking at different mobile home parks and storage facilities.
Yeah.
And then, I fell on commercial housing. And I love the idea of being an entrepreneur. My parents owned a few grocery stores growing up. I think I've talked about it for 15 years about being an entrepreneur and being my own boss. And at a certain point I said, I either have to stop talking about it or do it. And so I found this, and it's been a work in progress for about 2 years. I started not knowing a single thing, and then I hopped on LinkedIn one day and I just started requesting to be everybody's connection, so I can learn what people are doing and where the markets are and what's happening.
Right. So tell us, is it your brother, or tell us a little bit about his role and his interest in this problem?
So I brought him in about a year ago. I got to a point where I kind of hit a wall with the connections that I can make. And him and I have almost talked about going into business together. He was working with Assure, which is a company down in Utah.
I know, sure.
Yeah, and so he and I talked about it one day, and I showed him all of the facts that I've gathered and the people I've talked to. He really likes the money side of raising money, and so we kind of just put it together, and I've been working on it ever since. And it's come to every day I call him and say, hey, this Jackson Hole's got this issue, Colorado's got this issue. It's kind of fun to talk about.
So is the business model, it sounds like one that doesn't necessarily require you to be heavily capitalized. If you're basically just arranging a lease, if someone owns the building, you don't have to capitalize the building.
Well, so we're wanting to buy the property.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. So we've got the investors who are interested.
Okay.
The biggest thing right now, the biggest issue that we're having right now is companies saying, yes, we're interested, we want to do it, but then having them follow up with us because the investors need LOIs in order to move along with the process.
Okay, so you've got the real estate capital side covered, including, I assume, with that funds for doing the refurbishing and getting it there.
Yeah.
It's getting the folks that say, yes, we need housing to actually come to the table and say, we're willing to put $1 on the table, but to say we actually have to have housing and we need yours.
Exactly. And I know, from companies I've talked with here in Alaska, I mean, the need is coming up. It's gonna be another hard summer without that housing, and it'll be interesting to see how those companies respond without it.
Yeah. Well, in the case of a lot of entrepreneurial startups, generally encourage people to try and figure out what the MVP is, minimum viable product. Some way to kind of break that log jam of big project, but build a small one. Have you found a strategy in order to try and develop some small pilot type size efforts that wouldn't have the big commitment required on either of your LOI customer side or in terms of the funders on there? Are there some any MVP type of approaches you might use to get some experience and
Yeah, so one problem that we've seen is with these communities that we're looking at, even when you look at a, let's say a duplex, you're still paying a little over 2 million for this duplex that can only fit 4 or 5, maybe 6 employees. So when you run those numbers, it doesn't make sense to do. And so the property or what we're wanting to do in Whitefish is a little bit smaller than what we've looked at other places. We're looking at about 15 rooms or 15 apartments, which would, I believe, would get us to a good place as far as proving that concept. You know, these companies are out of Washington, out of Montana, out of Colorado, or anywhere from 8 to 35 properties. So we're trying to work with them to pick the properties that are going to allow us to prove that concept. Obviously, I can't go raise $12 million right now, but on a smaller project, 15 units we can do. So that's kind of my MVP right now is focusing on putting as many people into those units as we can in order to make that work.
so in terms of the capital requirements you have now, and we can't get into fundraising per se in terms of not going there, but assuming in general that you got the investors in place for an actual project with LOIs in place, then I assume the capital requirements for running the business right now are modest but not inconsequential in terms of the time to try and develop this. What are you looking for? I mean, are you looking for funding right now without going specific?
I am, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's to do what now?
So we are looking for funding to to get the name out there, but to really get these properties going. I mean, a lot of these communities, the housing there, people are willing to do owner financing on these properties and other in other ways. So right now it's just raising that money to buy these properties. Maybe I didn't answer your question.
Well, yeah, I guess I was coming at it with the assumption that you had the money through your other investors to buy the properties once you had the letter of intent.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it sounded like the focus right now is going and trying to develop folks that give you that letter of intent and trying to figure out how to entice or encourage, incentivize that.
And that's honestly right now, in order to get those things, I'm making phone calls to every organization, reaching out LinkedIn. I think that's the biggest thing I need right now is, the networking capabilities of those individuals. And I think it doesn't have to be a large company. It could be in Seward, 4 or 5 smaller companies that all need 2 or 3 apartments. So we're really trying just to get the name out there right now.
Yeah. So what else are you looking for at this point? I mean, other than fame, fortune, and lots of money, what would be helpful to you in terms of growing this opportunity?
I think the knowledge of just growing a business. I've never owned a business or started a business. I've had to read a lot of books on how to even get as far as I am right now. But I think the networking, introductions to small businesses or businesses that are interested or in need of these things. And right now, I think that's the biggest thing, just the networking for us.
Yeah, awesome. Well, there's some things we want to follow up with afterwards because I've got some folks I've worked with in both Seward and Juneau on the housing issue. Maybe some of those you've run into, maybe not, but I would see whether or not any of those would be helpful to you. I think there's a couple opportunities there.
They're very interesting.
The issue with investing in the timing is such that the big cycle here in Alaska, the Alaska Angel Conference is just wrapping up right now. But you might find that something to watch for. Unfortunately, the next cycle doesn't start till basically January of next year. We're just wrapping up that one, but they'll be having their big shindig on May 10th. And between now and then, you might want to watch what the Alaska Investor Network is, because the kind of funding for what you're doing and the amount of funding, because I'm imagining what you're doing right now, assuming you've got other capital commitments available to actually do the big projects, you just need the funding to go off and develop the customers. you know, that you're looking for a couple $100,000, just round numbers. That's the kind of money that can come out of stuff like the Angel Network that we have here, and there's some matching opportunities that would be available there. So there's some work that we can help. The Alaska Investor Network meets monthly, and that's another place that I think be valuable for you to look up. Their next meeting is next Wednesday, and they meet on the third Wednesdays now of the month. So they'll have a meeting this month. There'll be one more in May. All of May one's probably be canceled for the Angel Conference. But we ought to talk about some of those opportunities that are available there. The big issue that I'd love to try and unwrap is kind of two things. One is how to figure out how to get past the LOI barrier right now that it's got at this point, because I just see that as a chicken and egg. I don't see the egg breaking the chicken laying.
Exactly.
Very easily
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
And what it leads me to think is if there's some other way to sneak into this effort, you know, whether it's a side market like processing seafood processors, or whether it's some capital project man camp
Yes.
type activities, because we've got all sorts of projects going on across the state. Every single one of those projects has a temporary seasonal workforce problem. And, you know, so I'm thinking of things like some of the gold mines that are doing seasonal housing. Same problem, it's just a different location.
Yeah.
And the capital projects like port projects, I sort of, there's just all sorts of opportunities. It seems like I'm just wondering if there's a side market
Well,
that
and
might not be your core one you're
Yeah.
looking for, but might have a lower resistance to letter.
the other one we had looked into was the agricultural areas down in California, up in Washington. They bring a lot of people in to work those contracts and providing that housing for them too.
Have you thought about going sideways and actually figuring out how to build modular low cost housing and just skip the go find refurbish something and just, you know?
We've looked into like the housing they do for oil camps in the Midwest. We Travcos that have 3 different units that fit 2 in each, trailers, all of those things. There's a company that came out, Boxable, and they can build pretty fast. There's a long wait list for those,
Right.
but I think those are excellent opportunities to go in where there's no house in the bill and find an area to be able to develop and put things down.
Yeah, well, that's, my personal opinion, if you came in right now with a play on a low cost modular housing to be used for just all the things we just talked about, the seasonal man camps projects, there'd be a lot of folks super interested in helping do that. I'm thinking of the downtown hotel that they're getting ready to build at 5th and G, I think.
Yeah.
It's the front end of the parking garage.
Exactly.
Last I heard, that's a modular set of rooms out of China.
They're building them and bringing them in and setting them up. Yes.
Yeah, and that volume standardization, I think there's really fascinating opportunity. There's so much room, when you look at rural housing being $500,000 or $600,000 to build a single unit. There's a lot of room in that. It seems like to come with a better.
Looking at RV parks and buying trailers and putting them in, doing whatever you can to do. So,
Sounds interesting. Well, short term, anything else we can do to help you with getting the word out in terms of pushing this out? And quite frankly, I'll tell you, when you originally applied and you had employee housing solutions, I came away thinking, oh, great, another real estate investor is looking for a group of folks to come pitch the next real estate investment on there. And what you brought here today is something really important, really valuable, and a really important approach to this. So part of this will be trying to help reframe what you're doing so that it comes across as something, because I think I got a different impression of what you were potentially up to than what you're really doing, and that's part of what I'll be doing when I follow up about this thing. Is hey, this is something really important. It's not just a real estate flip a business kind of thing.
Yes, and I think that's the most important thing. the guy in Montana I talked to, the investor, he was, very involved in the community, and he said, you're not coming in and just trying to raise the rents for a bed, are you?
Right.
Doing it in a different way. I said, no. I said, we're trying to come in and help,
Yeah.
trying to alleviate the pressure.
Yeah, so, might also just talk about how to come up with the messaging, and a lot of times that's a lot of the work in pre-accelerators and accelerator type programs is really just working on how to present the business model and how to find the right triggers of the people interested in what you're doing. The other program, the Upstart Alpha, will be starting this fall, which is another good one for going through its customer discovery type of work there. Yeah, I'm fascinated in what you're working on. It's valuable. I appreciate taking the time.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Sure. Take it to Susan and I this
Yeah,
morning.
absolutely.
And run through that, but let's follow those contacts and how to think about doing this down the road.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Back to me, I guess.
Yeah. What's new in the community?
Yeah, what's new in the community? So I think I'm gonna probably wrap it up here.
Okay.
For the recording purposes, because the recording I usually chop off a bunch of the extra stuff anyway. So let's see, are there any announcements that are going to be germane to this recording? Military innovation is going on this afternoon, but I won't get this posted until after that's happened. But I guess if anybody is interested who sees this later, military innovation ecosystem, we are starting to plan a monthly meeting on the second Wednesdays of the month in the afternoon. The first one's going to be happening today. So presumably there'll be more in the future, and you can contact any one of us to find out a little bit more about that. The other announcements have to do with the deadline for the SBIR accelerator program is April 30th. And that's going to be I think a 7-week-long program helping people who are interested in SBIR funding. There's then going to be the Arctic Innovation Competition finals coming up here in a few weeks, and the Alaska Angel Conference on May 10th. I think will be kind of the last major springtime activity. We had the business plan competition on Friday. I haven't heard what the results of that are, but I'm looking forward to that. If anyone wants to follow up on those events or others, I encourage you to subscribe to the Alaska Startup Digest. That comes out each week on Tuesdays to get access to information, and also to look at the startup calendar that we maintain on the akv3.com website. It's got a link on top for the calendar where you'll find these events as well as deadlines for applications on that calendar. So thank you.
Awesome.
Long pause and I'll stop recording. Thanks for hanging out with us, Susan. Anything else on your end?
No, thank you. That I like that idea about the man camp thing, and I was thinking too, for that coastal, the coastal resorts and stuff like that, maybe refurbishing like a small cruise ship or a small processor, boats, and you could move those to the different ports along the coast as they're needed seasonally.
I think that's a great idea. I was thinking about that with the seafood processors, because there's a bit of a seasonal cycle of which processors are up and running, especially the shore ones. And I was thinking about that in terms of the code thing. If you just went and bought a big old barge that wasn't being used and basically built it up with a bunch of housing units, you wouldn't have to worry about any zoning.
Right. In Seward, you could park it right there, and there's plenty of, places to, they would use that housing.
Ship repair yard, it's not that busy. There'd be all sorts of places to park a barge.
Right.
So either refurbishing an old boat or just taking a barge and building a modular system on that. But so many of the places that have this tourist housing problem in Alaska are water, and that would be an interesting play to avoid
Right. There's
Actually,
Juneau and Skagway and Haynes, all of them. Sick
Yeah.
time. So, well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for having me and putting this on again.
You bet. Thanks for hanging in there. See you around.
All right.